everyone. Thank you again for joining today's NeedyMeds special topic webinar, Samaritans, Suicide Prevention. My name is Carla. I'm the Director of User Engagement at NeedyMeds. And today, we're going to cover, again, the topic of suicide prevention, presented by a guest from Samaritans. Before we get started, I'd like to offer a few tips so you can make the most out of today's presentation. First of all, if you do have questions, you can feel free to type them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel. Just know that we will reserve answering questions until the end. If we don't get a chance to answer your question, we will follow up with you by email. But of course, we will provide the contact information for Samaritans and NeedyMeds, so feel free to reach out to us sooner if needed. You will find copies of our PowerPoint slide decks used in today's presentations as well, and those are in the handout section. I'm also going to suggest that you subscribe to the NeedyMeds YouTube channel. It's a great way to not miss out on any new content because we do post all of our videos, webinars, and presentations. And as I mentioned, you can find our PowerPoint slide decks. I went out of order there, I apologize. But as I mentioned, you can find our PowerPoint slide decks as well as the other reading materials we thought you'd be interested, again, in that handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started with what is NeedyMeds. For those of you not familiar with who we are, what you're looking at on your screen is our mission statement, a statement about how we achieve that mission, and our mission statement. But simply put, NeedyMeds connects people to programs that will help them afford their healthcare expenses. We're a national nonprofit that does that free and anonymously through a helpline, 1-800-503-6897, and a website, needymeds.org. I like to put up a screenshot of the NeedyMeds homepage because really our website is the face of our organization. As you can see, it's full of resources. In particular, you can find healthcare cost savings resources under that patient savings tab and educational resources under the advocates tab. That's where you can sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, Vitals. Here, for example, you can sign up for webinar announcements and order some of our printed materials, including our drug discount card. As I mentioned, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. You can find a link to that here on the top right of our homepage with the rest of the social media icons. It's the third one from the left, and as I suggested, we hope you do subscribe. Please always check out the calendar of events on the bottom right side of the homepage where you can register for all of our other upcoming free webinars. So, as you saw in our mission statement, an important part of what we do is educating people. And we do that by letting them know about NeedyMeds and the resources we offer, but also by letting them know about other resources and keeping them educated on important healthcare topics, which is why we are so pleased to have a representative from Samaritans, Inc. here with us today, Rose Chayette. So let me tell you a little bit about Samaritans first. Samaritans, Inc. is a suicide prevention nonprofit. Their mission is to reduce the incidence of suicide by alleviating despair, isolation, distress, and suicidal feelings. In this webinar, you will learn about risk factors and warning signs for suicide, how to help someone who may be suicidal, and basic steps in getting a suicidal person help. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our guest, Rose Chayette, who will be walking us through this information. Rose is the Director for Community Education and Outreach with Samaritans, Inc. In this position, she oversees a team that teaches suicide prevention workshops to youth, adults, and elders throughout the greater Boston area. The team delivers about 6,000 suicide prevention workshops a year, reaching approximately 20,000 people. Rose has been in this role 5 years, and prior to this, she spent 2 years answering calls and texts on the Samaritans helpline. So without further ado, and hopefully seamlessly, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic and the screen to Rose. And as she grabs that screen, I will once again remind you that if you do have questions, don't hesitate to type them into that questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel. And with that, Rose, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to you. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carla. And it's always a pleasure to be able to provide this webinar for NeedyMeds. So thank you all so much for being here today, everybody. Before we get started, and before I share a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today and about the organization, I wanted to just right off the bat bring up this helpline number. And the reason I'm bringing it up as the very first thing is because the topic that we're going to be discussing today, suicide and suicide prevention, is very difficult. And I don't know if anybody participating today has been impacted by suicide, or whether you're just having a really difficult time lately. And so, I encourage you actually to write this number down right now if you can, so that if at any point during this webinar it is bringing something up for you, or you're struggling in some way, that maybe if you feel like you actually have to remove yourself from the webinar, you could call or text this phone number to, get a little bit of in the moment support. So that's why I really encourage you to hold on to that number, but I'll be talking more about it shortly. So here are our objectives for today. And I do want to, first off, reiterate the difficulty of this topic. And, I hope that whether you are looking to gain some skills around supporting a family member who could be struggling, maybe it's a coworker, maybe, you yourself are having a difficult time. I hope that you will leave this webinar today with a little bit more knowledge about this topic and feeling a little bit more empowered to have difficult conversations. I want to share a little bit more about what Samaritans does. So we offer that helpline that I shared just a second ago. That is our 24-hour helpline, and that's really available to anyone wherever they live in the country. It's available by calling or by texting. And very often, I think there's a totally sort of fair and normal assumption, which is that, okay, Samaritans does suicide prevention, and here is this phone number. This must be a suicide hotline. And, first off, yes, we do get calls and texts every single day from people who are struggling with thoughts of suicide. We actually have more people, though, who reach out who are not, in a crisis in that moment, but they really need some support. Maybe they're struggling with isolation. Maybe they are struggling with, a student is getting bullied in school. Maybe someone's dealing with an illness. Maybe it's just 3 in the morning and someone's lying in bed, simply can't get to sleep, and thoughts are racing round and round. They want to talk. So I really encourage all of you to hold on to the Samaritan's number, which I'll share again at the end, but hold on to it, whether you might need some extra support at some point, or whether you have someone in your life that could use some extra support. And I do want to share that if we are speaking to someone on our helpline who shares that they are thinking about suicide, there are a couple of things that we do which I think sort of go against kind of what we might naturally want to say to someone who is thinking about suicide. So, for example, I think it's really common to want to say to someone, "Oh my gosh, you have so much to live for." That's a common thing to want to say, because if we can imagine this person who is really struggling, almost like down in this hole, in this dark place, and I'm up here and I want to pull them out of that dark place and remind them of all the good things they have going for them. But they're just simply not feeling that way. They can't see those things in that moment because they're feeling so low, because they're feeling so hopeless. And me sort of trying to remind them about it is not going to pull them out of this dark place. What actually might help them out of this dark place, at least this sort of crisis they're in the moment, is listening to them and being non-judgmental and showing that compassion and that empathy. So these are things that we do on our helpline. We know I'm not going to solve this person's problems, but if I can just give them some really sort of compassionate and caring and empathetic listening, they might be able to find their way out of this dark place and be able to feel safe, even if it's just for tonight. Maybe tomorrow's another story, but if I can help them stay safe tonight, that's huge. We also try to avoid saying to people things like think about your friends or think about your families, because a lot of times folks who are thinking about suicide really are thinking about all of those people in their life, but they're just feeling like such a burden. So that's kind of why we might avoid saying that one. And the last thing I'll just say about the helpline is that if anybody were to call or text the number, the volunteer on the other end of the line shares their name. They ask the person reaching out if they're comfortable sharing their name, but we don't require anyone to actually give their name. The person calling or texting could say, I'm not comfortable sharing my name. They could give a fake name. We don't really know. We're just there to talk and to listen. We have a couple other resources that are sort of more specific to Massachusetts, where Samaritans is located. We're in Boston, and sort of, due to COVID-19, a lot has changed, and some of these changes, are perhaps kind of long-term. So, depending on where you are, what you might be looking for, we may still be able to support you, even if you're not local to Massachusetts. But you can certainly go to our Samaritans website, which I'll share at the end, to look for more information about our other resources. So a couple of brief statistics. One of the challenges with sharing statistics is it sometimes can make suicide seem a bit black and white when every situation is different and unique, and there might even be things that I say today that might conflict with an experience that you've had. But suicide is a public health crisis, and so I think it's worthwhile to just share a couple of brief statistics. So that number in the top left-hand corner is sort of in terms of the number of suicides in the United States. That's from 2018, sort of the most recent year that information is available. That number is probably not accurate, though, because there are situations where, perhaps there was a drug overdose and it was a suicide, but it wasn't actually reported that way. Maybe there was a car accident. It was a suicide, but it wasn't reported as such. So it's a little bit hard to exactly know what the true numbers are, but it's estimated that it's significantly higher than what is being reported. I also want to share that reportedly, middle-aged males seem to be dying by suicide at the highest rate, with elders a very close second. Again, this is reported, hard to know what is 100% accurate, but this is what is being reported. And also, it seems as though women do attempt suicide more than men do, but men die by suicide at higher rates. And there's a couple things that we can sort of point to with this one. I think in terms of our society, a lot of men and boys are told to, quote unquote, man up and be strong and don't ask for help, and it's a weakness if you show any vulnerability. And I think it can be a little bit different for girls and women. So that's certainly part of it. Another part of it actually has to do with access to lethal means and access to firearms. And it seems like boys and men tend to gravitate towards more lethal means. This is statistically certainly not always, but that's sort of what has been found in some research. I know we have folks probably all over the country. So this is from 2018. And so the darker the color, the higher the rates of suicide are. So, I encourage you, depending on where you live, you can certainly look up to see sort of where your state lies. I know where I am in Massachusetts, we have one of the lowest suicide rates in the country. I believe at the moment we're about 58th, although some of our neighbors, as you can see, because I think a lot about New England where I am, a lot of my New England neighbors to the north of Massachusetts have significantly higher rates. And lots of different reasons behind this, never one reason, but I just encourage you to kind of look up to see where you live and what those rates are. I want to share a couple of myths about suicide. And, with this first one here, it's a really commonly held belief, commonly held fear. If I talk about suicide, if I ask someone directly if they are thinking about suicide, could I put the idea into their head? Could I somehow influence someone to act in a certain way? And I really want everyone to know that that's just not how it works, and that actually talking about suicide can be a way to prevent suicide because it opens up conversation. And for a lot of people who struggle with these thoughts, there is often a lot of fear of judgment, a lot of concern, and I think the stigma and that fear of what will people think of me really holds people back from sharing what's truly going on and sharing the true thoughts that they're having. And so if we can, approach someone that we're worried about and really open up conversation and be non-judgmental, and really take them as they are, that can be a way to truly help someone. So I'm not naive. I know that in an hour-long webinar, no one is going to just walk away suddenly with, 100% comfort with this topic. My hope is that you would, feel a little bit more empowered, though, to know if I'm worried about somebody, I can have a conversation with them, and I may actually be opening up a conversation that they truly need to have and are wanting to have with someone, and I'm not going to place an idea into their mind. I think that's something that I really hope you all walk away with today. I want to talk about the second bullet point here. The topic of, are there warning signs? How can we know if someone is thinking about suicide? There are not always warning signs. There, is, as you can see here, there is some evidence out there to suggest that about 70% of the time there are warning signs. But, that number there doesn't take a number of things into account. It doesn't take into account that sometimes someone who's really struggling, if there is a change in their behavior, they might show a certain change to only one person. They might say something else to a different person, and maybe a third person sees a completely different change. And kind of on its own, individually, these signs, or these changes rather, in the person didn't really seem like much of a big deal, but kind of looking at it fully does sort of help paint a picture that, maybe this person is or was really struggling. But I think it's important to keep in mind that we can't really be held responsible for information we didn't have or things we didn't see. I know there's a lot of guilt very often for lost survivors of, were there signs? How come I didn't see them? And we don't even always have these warning signs. So my feeling with this one, the best thing that we can do is just be aware of what some of those warning signs might be. And then also, the second part to that is to feel comfortable enough to have a conversation with someone if we're seeing changes, or if we just have that gut feeling inside, like, I'm not sure this person's okay. And lastly, I want to just mention this third bullet point here. I think there's often fear of, I'm not an expert. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I don't know what this person should do. And that's completely understandable. But I also think that, even some skills that maybe you already have, even some basic listening skills, um, you know, asking questions, like open-ended questions to somebody, trying to validate what they're feeling. I think many of us can do this. And I want to share that on our Samaritans helpline, we have volunteers who are as young as 15 years old, which I think really goes to show. And of course, our volunteers have extensive training on how to have difficult conversations and how to assess for suicide risk and what to do if somebody is at a high risk for suicide. But, even a teenager can really support someone. And I think it's a valuable thing to keep in mind. So this is a really complex topic that might already be clear. And I want to just, reiterate that every situation is different, and real life situations contradict the data all the time. And so much is still unknown about suicide, even by those who study suicide. One thing that is known, though, is very often in talking to people who have attempted suicide but have lived through that experience, oftentimes they'll describe that, they didn't actually want to die, but they just needed that pain to end. And I think that's a valuable thing to keep in mind is, for a lot of people who struggle with these thoughts, they often feel like, I don't know what to do. Like, I can't live with this pain any longer, and I don't think I want to, die, but I don't know what else to do. It feels like the only option to be relieved of this pain. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And lastly, I'll just share that people in suicide prevention are actually trying to change a little bit of the language that we use, moving away from saying commit suicide. Commit suicide, it has sort of that crime connotation, even like a blaming sort of something behind it. And I think that we often talk about suicide deaths very differently from other kinds of deaths. So people in this field are trying to use some other language: died by suicide, took their life, killed themselves. I never get mad when I hear somebody say commit suicide. It's the language that we hear, but I do think that language is pretty powerful, and it can kind of build to the stigma and some of the confusion with this topic. So that's why I like to mention that. So there's never just one thing that's leading somebody to think about suicide. It's usually multiple risk factors, we can call them, which, essentially are not causes, but contributing factors. And I have a list here. This is certainly not the only, these are not the only challenges that a person may face. This is just sort of a small sample, but these ones are pretty common, I would say. And what can happen is maybe we have somebody who's dealing with a lot of risk factors, and maybe they had been kind of building and building and building for a very long time. Maybe they're all just sort of crashing down onto a person, and this individual has never had to deal with so many challenges at once. Maybe on top of these risk factors, they're feeling like no one's helping them, no one's listening to them, they're feeling totally out of control. Maybe they are struggling with mental health challenges, though certainly mental health issues do not cause suicide. And I think an important one too is that on top of all of the challenges and the lack of support they feel they have, and that isolation, there's often, feelings of hopelessness start to set in, feeling like this just isn't going to get better. And if all those things are piling on someone's shoulders, maybe they're starting to feel like, well, what's even the point of this? I don't want to be here anymore. I can't be here anymore with all of this pain that I'm experiencing. I share that before I move on to this slide, actually, I share that because I think it can be really hard to sort of understand how somebody can get to this point of thinking about suicide if we have never been there ourselves. Maybe we never will be able to understand, but if we can sort of do our best to kind of get into that mindset a little bit and try to see, like, how could somebody get to this point, it can help us be in a better position to help someone who might be having these thoughts. So like I said earlier, we don't always have warning signs, but it seems like more often than not, there are some changes in a person, and there really are just that, changes in what we typically know about them. And they can usually fall into these three categories. So first off, with verbal, some people are really explicit and really straightforward with any thoughts that they're having. But oftentimes it might be a little bit more subtle. Even a statement, someone saying like, I just can't do this anymore. That's a really vague statement. That's hard. If someone were to say that to me, I don't really know what they mean by that. So what I would do is I would say to them, you said that you just can't do this anymore. Like, what did you mean when you said that? Like, what is the this in this statement? So I would sort of dig in a little bit deeper to get more clarity of what's going on. Maybe it's a little more direct, like, no one would miss me if I were gone. Like I have here, I'm tired of being a burden. People also make jokes about suicide. I can certainly think of times that I heard from, kids all the way up to elders sort of making sort of casual comments about this. And it's hard to know if someone is really struggling or not. So if we don't really know, I think it's, again, worth it to sort of ask someone what's going on. And something else we know is that sometimes people make comments or jokes about death, about suicide, and it sounds like they're joking, but they're almost trying to see if anyone around them is really listening to them or kind of taking them seriously. So, my recommendation is if you see, or excuse me, if you hear a comment, a casual one, a joke about suicide, about death, or see something written even in a text in social media, in a story written by a child, whatever it might be, ask that person, say to them, hey, I heard that joke you made, or I saw that comment you wrote, and I really take those statements seriously. Is something really going on? And they might feel really uncomfortable that you kind of, dug in a little bit or were asking them about this, and maybe they even get a little bit upset or angry at you. But, this is just me. I would rather make a situation uncomfortable. I would rather offend somebody by asking some of these questions further than kind of hold back for fear of offending them. So that's just my sort of personal perspective, but I think it's worthwhile to think about that if you, or the next time you hear somebody make a joke about this or a sort of casual comment. Physical changes, weight, appetite, hygiene, changes in sleep patterns. As you can see, there's a lot more of the behavioral ones: withdrawal, declining school or work performance, loss of pleasure, interest in activities. I am thinking sort of like during the pandemic, so hard with a lot of these because like have to be more withdrawn, and you know maybe the activities we used to like we can't do anymore, whatever it might be. That can be a sort of a challenging thing to deal with. And a lot of these warning signs too can just be even normal things that we deal with. Like sometimes we go through weeks of really, really bad sleep. Sometimes we go through situations where our mood is really down, and maybe it has nothing to do with mental health issues, nothing to do with suicide. So this is what I would do if I saw a change in someone that I know. Usually more than one change, usually not overnight, at least over a couple weeks, a few weeks, a couple months sort of uh, time. I would talk to them. I would say to them what I'm seeing. I would say, I've noticed you seem a lot more tired than usual, or I've noticed that we usually meet up to take walks every weekend, but it seems like you've canceled the last few weekends. Or I've noticed that you wrote some kind of dark things on Facebook. Whatever the change is, the concern, whatever you might even have a gut feeling about, you could say to that person what you're seeing, and that might really open up conversation. And I think that for someone who's struggling, who maybe feels like no one is seeing me, no one is noticing my struggles, my pain, that can feel really supportive to them. So it's kind of trying to meet people in the middle, or even meet them further than in the middle, to show that we are there for them. So just like people deal with different challenges in life, and they may exhibit different warning signs, people also have different levels of resiliency and types of self-care they do, and things that can sort of, help to balance out the stress and the challenges. So I just have a couple of things here that can help to balance out those difficulties. I think what I would encourage all of you to do, when I'm doing my in-person workshops with people, I always have them right then and there, just write down on a piece of paper, what is my self-care? What helps me? What brings me some joy? What can I balance out my stress with? So, I encourage you to do the same. Think about what helps me. And if you're struggling with that, I think that's totally understandable. I think that we are always working to build up our resiliency, always working on building up our self-care, getting better at taking time for ourselves. So if you're struggling with that, worthwhile to talk to someone about that, and brainstorm a bit, and figure out some new things to do to take better care of yourself. I like this self-care wheel here. If you even just Google self-care wheel, this will come up, and it has all kinds of ideas based on these sort of 6 different categories. So, I know that the text is probably a little bit small for you, and we don't really have time for you all to read every single thing. But again, if you just Google self-care wheel, it can help to give some ideas. And that can be sort of a nice thing to look through, because I know for myself, I hear people talk about different types of coping mechanisms, and I've had some that I've heard, and I've been like, I never even thought to do that. I want to try that for myself. So we could always be building it up and getting better with it. So what we're going to talk about now is what we can actually do to help someone. And maybe it is a colleague, a family member, a friend. Maybe you've seen some concerning things in the person, like perhaps sort of some of those risk factors, or maybe you've seen some changes, you're not really sure. Maybe you just have a gut feeling. And I really think that we should trust our guts when it comes to this, and trust our instincts. And so how can you help that person? How can you really support them? Well, we have to listen. And I don't mean just listening. I mean sort of actively listening, which is hard work, because it requires quieting all of the chatter, all of the noise, all of the, oh, I have to do this, have to do that, the distractions around us. It's really focusing on what that person is saying and letting them express their feelings, and not judging them for whatever they are going through, whatever they're feeling, whatever they've done. Having open body language, crossing arms. I like to cross my arms, it's comfortable, but if I'm having a conversation with someone, that could send a negative message. It could look kind of judgmental or closed off. Repeating back what I'm hearing them say, validating them. These are all good things to do. I want to really talk about these first two don'ts here, because I think these first two sometimes I get some pushback on, of like, wait a second, I can't do that, or don't I want to try to help them with their problem? So, I think that I'm not saying, for this first one, I'm not saying we should never talk about ourselves or never reflect on our own experiences, but just, I think about this for a second. Imagine that you are sharing a problem with someone in your life, and they say to you, oh my gosh, I completely understand what you're going through. And then they kind of start talking about their own experience. Think about how you might feel. I think for a lot of us, I know for myself, I get frustrated by that. And oftentimes I'll think, well, this person just said to me that they understand, but I don't really think they do understand. And that can be kind of frustrating when people do that. So that's sort of one of the reasons that I think it's worth it to hold off sometimes on doing the I understand comments. Something that I like to do is to say instead, I think it's understandable that you're feeling this way, or I think anybody would feel this way if they were in your shoes or in this situation. Something else we can do is say to someone, I don't know exactly what it's like to be in your situation. There's no way for me to know what it's like to be in your shoes, but I have been through something maybe a little bit similar. Do you want to hear what that was like for me? Or do you want to hear sort of how I dealt with that, in case it could help you? That is something that we can do. So I think with this first one, it's just sort of pumping the brakes a little bit. We all want to talk about ourselves, especially when we hear something that we feel rings true for us, but it can be really supportive to just let somebody have that space to talk about, what is happening for them. With that second bullet point here, don't give advice or try to solve their problems. Again, this is a tricky one. I think that our brains are wired in a sense to, if we hear a problem, we want to fix that problem. I struggle with that constantly, especially if someone in my life that I care about comes to me with a problem. I don't want them to struggle or suffer or be in pain. I want that problem to go away. So I might feel really inclined to start to give advice, but there's a really good chance they didn't want that advice. There's a good chance they just wanted somebody to listen, to hear them. And maybe I give advice that actually backfires, or maybe I give advice and they already tried it before, and so they're feeling sort of low or even more frustrated about that. And also, if we're talking about really truly listening to somebody, I don't think we can really actively listen to somebody while also trying to problem solve. I don't think our brain can do both of those things at once. So I think it's worthwhile to try to hold back on giving the advice. One option though could be, if somebody comes to you with an issue, you could ask them, what do you think would help you most right now? Do you want to try to fix this problem, or do you just need to vent and kind of see where they're at? And that, and if they do want advice, I just probably would always preface advice with, this is just what I would do. if I were in your shoes, I have no idea if it's going to work, just to kind of give yourself a little bit of that, because you don't want to be held responsible if the advice goes poorly. So that's kind of how I would preface any advice giving. So if we're listening to somebody, we also should ask questions. And ideally, we're going to ask open-ended questions, or questions that begin with what and how and when. As Samaritans, we try to avoid why questions, because sometimes asking questions with why, like, why are you feeling this way? Or why did you do that? Or, anything like that, it can almost sort of turn into an interrogation. And this person might even feel a little bit judged or sort of defensive. Also, I think when we're asking a why question, we're really looking for an answer, and there's a good chance they may not have that answer. Speaking to them as an equal is important, using their words to acknowledge their pain. I really want to talk about this last bullet point here, because I think that there's often a concern going into difficult conversations of, what if I don't know what to say? Or what if I say the wrong thing? Or what if I just mess up? And I think we often get really uncomfortable when there's just silence. We want to fill every moment with conversation, but if somebody shares something really difficult and we're sort of like, oh, I don't know what to say, and it's just quiet, we might feel like, what am I doing wrong? This is not going well. My recommendation is, if you don't know what to say to someone, you can tell them that. You can say to them, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm really glad that you told me this, or I'm so glad you felt comfortable coming to me. Oh my gosh, I'm at a loss for words. I really am, but can you tell me more about this? I really want to hear more. I think those kinds of statements are honest, they're compassionate, they're kind, and maybe it's more compassion than this person's been getting from anybody. So, we're only human. We're gonna mess up. We're gonna say the wrong thing. We're gonna not know what to say, and it's okay to own that and sort of be honest about that. So let's say that you have been having a conversation with someone, and you're listening and asking questions and showing that empathy and that compassion, and maybe they say something that seems really helpless or really hopeless. Maybe you just have that gut feeling that this is actually a much more serious situation. So this is what I would probably do if I was, to feel like maybe I had to sort of ask them about if they're thinking about suicide. I would first off say thank you to them. Thank you for sharing with me what you've shared. Must have been so hard to talk about. So I really appreciate you opening up to me. And, I wanted to ask you, do you sometimes feel so bad that you think about suicide, or have you thought about ending your life? I think that these two types of phrasing here are really good ways to ask directly about suicide, and it's because these two questions are very direct. It's getting right to the point. It's not beating around the bush whatsoever. I have another type of phrasing here. Do you wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? And I still think this is a good question. It's just not quite as direct as the first two. And the reason I think it's so important to be direct is, we don't want to leave a conversation more confused. We want to really know where this person is at and how they're feeling. Sometimes there is a little more comfort in asking something like, are you having thoughts of harming yourself? Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? And that kind of question, those kinds of questions are okay, but they're kind of not really getting at the topic of suicide. So I think if I was to ask somebody if they're having thoughts of harming themselves, I would also take it a step further and ask, and have you been having any thoughts of suicide? I just kind of bring it that step further. Again, I don't expect anyone to leave this webinar today feeling 100% or maybe even 50% asking these questions. A big part of this is just letting you know that it's okay to ask these questions directly, and to know that this can be really helpful for someone who is struggling. If they were to say no, our instinct might be to say that we're relieved. Maybe we feel relief and we want to express that relief to this person and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're not feeling that way. I'm so relieved to hear that. And first off, one of the reasons I think it might be good to not share that relief is maybe they actually are thinking about suicide, but they didn't feel comfortable sharing that. So if they are having thoughts of suicide and now I'm saying to them, I'm so glad you're not feeling that way, that's going to be really hard for that person to hear, and maybe they won't feel comfortable coming back to me and being honest at any point. It kind of builds to this sort of like the stigma around this topic as well. So if I got that no, I probably would say to that person, thank you for telling me that. Let's talk a little bit more. I'd like to hear more about what we were discussing before. Explain why, and I think it's okay to explain why you asked, especially if someone's like, whoa, 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 why'd you ask me that? If they get kind of offended, if they kind of seem confused as to what you're getting at, I would probably say to them, it kind of depends on what they've been talking about, but I might say something like, I've been hearing what you're going through and just what you were describing. It sounds like you're in a really difficult position. And I know that sometimes when people are really struggling, they think about suicide. And so this is why I asked you. So I think it's okay to explain that, especially if the person sort of is looking for more clarity. Now, the big what if they say yes? What if they say yes, they're thinking about suicide? And I think that this is one of the reasons people often avoid asking directly about suicide, is because of that fear of what if they say yes. So the information I'm going to share in the next slide, it's a little bit high level. It's what we do at Samaritan. So it's what a lot of people, like clinicians, might do and places might do to sort of assess somebody's risk level. This might feel way sort of out of anyone's comfort zone, but I still think it's important to show, just to help people understand that, suicidality kind of exists on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, we have someone who is having thoughts of suicide. On the other end of the spectrum, we have someone who not only are they having thoughts, but they know how they might take their life, they have access to what they would use, and they have a time frame. So, these questions can help to determine sort of what this person's risk level is. So again, this might sound really scary. This might sound way too direct, but you're not going to put an idea into someone's mind by asking them, have you thought about how you might take your life if you were going to? They have or they haven't. Do you know what you might use if you were to take your life? Do you have access to that? If you were to take your life, have you thought about when you might do this? So these questions, again, are probably kind of scary to think about. And one option could be that if you do have someone in your life who's really struggling, you could even reach out to a helpline. You could reach out to Samaritans. We have people reach out to us pretty regularly, with another person to get some support, and we can do this risk assessment as well. So that is something to keep in mind. I really do feel, though, that if someone's life is at risk, that's that's a lot to carry on your own shoulders. I think it's too much for one person to carry the weight, to carry the burden of that information. So I think it's really valuable to get others involved to try to help this person. If it's sort of a workplace situation, maybe there is a protocol to follow. If it's a family member or a friend, getting other folks involved to try to help this person. And I think one of the challenges is, what if you were told this information sort of in confidence and it was really presented as, I'm telling you this because I trust you and you can't tell anybody. That's an immensely difficult position to be in. And, I do workshops with schools, and I always tell the students that I'm working with, if a friend tells you they're thinking about suicide, you really have to tell a trusted adult, even if it was told to you as a secret. And as you might be able to imagine, there's a lot of pushback. A lot of students are very resistant to that because, they say their friendships are the most important thing. They would never go against their friends' wishes. They could never, their friend would never talk to them again. And, I always try to really validate that for them, and say that's, understandable. Your friendship is the most important thing, but at least for me, I would rather have that friend who is still here and is mad at me rather than the person who's not here anymore. So even though I say that to kids, I think it's worthwhile for adults to also hear that and know that, sometimes we have to break that confidentiality to get that person some help. And it's a hard situation to be in, but it might really benefit that person in the long run. So managing reactions, I think, is important. And if someone just shared something with you about, you know, mental health issues or thoughts of suicide, they might feel really worked up and really anxious or scared or fearful of what's going to happen. They might be sort of up here at a 10. And if they see that we're kind of creeping up there to a 10 and getting worked up and feeling anxious and fearful ourselves, it could make them feel worse. So I know it's easier said than done to stay calm, but I think it can benefit everybody to just kind of do our best to stay calm. But also, give yourself permission to be human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to not have an answer. We're going to not know what to do sometimes, and that's just the way it is. I want you to all know that, you are not alone. I'm sure you have others in the community to support you. Here at Samaritans, we are here to support you as well. Debriefing, talking with somebody after a difficult situation, self-care is also really important. And to the bullet point here, a third from the bottom that says being mindful of limitations. We can't control anybody else. We can only control ourselves and our own actions. And if I'm worried about somebody, of course I want to, strap myself to them, keep them safe 24/7. That's just not possible. So we can't always help everybody because we can't control anybody else. But I think what we can do our best is to try to help them, try to give them resources, try to be there for them. That is something that we can do. And that might be enough to help keep them safe. So I want to share our Samaritans helpline again. Call, text 24/7, 365. You can be anywhere in the country to utilize this helpline. You can I certainly encourage you to keep it for yourself, and I encourage you to give it to anybody else in your life who may be struggling with whether it's thoughts of suicide, some kind of crisis, whether it's just the everyday life stressors that we go through day or night. And here is my
Rose?
email address. Oh, yes.
Oh, no, go ahead. Please continue.
Thank you. So here's my email address. Just want to make sure if anybody wants that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to leave this here for just another second before I bring up I believe is my final slide after this. Oh, I have two more quick slides. So I just want to finish off by saying, I think we all have a role to play in suicide prevention. And while we certainly can't help every person, we can do our best to support them. And I really want to, reiterate that active listening, being non-judgmental, compassion, empathy, these things can go so far for someone who's really struggling. And, for a lot of people, certainly not all, but for a lot of people, thoughts of suicide are temporary. With time, with support, they might pass. And, if we can help and try to keep them safe in that time when they're in that crisis, there's a good chance they might go on to live long, healthy lives. And my last slide I want to bring up is just because this was a heavy topic, and I don't know, you all probably are, maybe you're watching this after it's already been recorded or watching it at different times. Maybe it's the middle of the day, maybe it's the evening, but I just want you to, find a way to take care of yourself. I think after, this is a difficult topic. So if you can do one thing for yourself immediately after to kind of get into a good mindset, or just at some point today, I really encourage you to. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic back over to Carla.
Rose, thank you so very much for that thorough presentation on suicide and suicide prevention. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience, which I think is fantastic. And again, I will keep up that contact information for suicide prevention in just a couple of slides. In the meantime, again, I really am so pleased. We welcome back Rose several times throughout the year because not only is it such an important topic, and as Rose said, we agree that we can all play our part, and education is a huge part when it comes to suicide prevention. But where I think Samaritans and Rose really shine is they take this really heavy um, subject that feels not even approachable, and they unpack it with actionable, easy steps that we can all at least wrap our heads around and hopefully practice in our own life. But also stressing what Rose said, that a lot of people reach out to that suicide prevention phone number not for themselves, but for someone they care about, and also just to get tips for themselves with how to deal with such a heavy topic in their life. So we're going to get to some of those questions coming in, and please don't forget to check out that handout section of your go-to webinar control panel, because in addition to our PowerPoint slide decks, there is some reading material that we think you'd be interested in. I want to remind everybody that NeedyMeds is also here as a source of support, particularly financially. If you are having difficulty affording your healthcare expenses, including but not only medications, don't hesitate to visit NeedyMeds.org. And of course, reach out to our call center counselors. Sometimes it's nice to just speak with a live person. They are available Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., weekdays, Eastern Standard Time, and we do have Spanish speaking counselors as well. I want to leave up, as promised, that contact information for Samaritans, and don't hesitate to reach out to me. My contact information is at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions related to NeedyMeds. As I leave that up, I want to go ahead and again get to those questions coming in. And the first one, Rose, I know you addressed this earlier on in the presentation, but I think it's a great opportunity to readdress this because I know it's something. The question is, how do you know if it's actually suicidal or if it's making a joke or making a comment?
Carla, your audio broke up a little bit. Do you mind just repeating that question?
Sorry about that. And to our audience, just don't hesitate to send me a message if my audio is going in and out. So the question that came in from an audience member is, how do you know if someone is actually suicidal or if they're just making a joke or making a comment?
Right. Yeah, so I think this is something, I know we talked about a little bit, but it is obviously kind of like still a little bit mystifying and hard to know. And I mean, my feeling is I always want to, I kind of want to take somebody where they're at. I want to, if someone is sharing, making kind of like a joke or a comment, I sometimes do wonder if someone makes a joke or a comment about this, are they sort of like not like testing, but are they sort of trying to see how I might react or somebody around might react? Or they kind of putting on that veil of like a joke almost to kind of mask possibly how they're truly feeling? What I said in the big earlier when I mentioned this briefly was, if I hear a comment, even if it seems like it's a joke, I just don't think it hurts to check in with someone. And maybe we're really not going to know how they're feeling just if we hear the comment. But if we can really say to them, I heard that joke and I know you were laughing. Maybe it's 100% a joke, but I take that stuff seriously. Is something really going on? I'm here for you. If it wasn't a joke, I'm here to talk to you. Or if you're not comfortable talking about it right now, I will be here for you at any point. So, it is hard to know exactly, when is this a joke? When is this serious? So because we don't really know, I just encourage you to dig in a little bit deeper. If you do hear something that you're a little concerned about.
I think that's a great question, and I think a lot of us can certainly relate to it or have been in that situation at some point in your life. And this second question, I think, is a great. It's almost a follow-up question to this one, and I'm glad somebody asked it because, again, it's something I would ask myself, which is, what if someone does need help, but I cannot, for very many reasons, I can't be the person to help them? What do I do?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And I have to believe that there's different reasons why we might feel like we can't help them, whether we just simply don't know the answers. Maybe we're not a professional. We just really don't have the resources at our fingertips or know what to say or what to do. Maybe it's more sort of a self-preservation thing of we we don't have the capacity because we're dealing with our own things, or maybe we do feel burdened by that person or by what they're going through. So I think whatever the reason is, and maybe it's a totally different reason than I even just said, but whatever the reason is that maybe you feel like you can't support that person, I think that we have to take care of ourselves. So maybe it's worthwhile to say to that person, let's say they come to you looking for support. I think it's okay to say to them, listen, I really know that you're having a difficult time, and I really want to support you. I don't know if I'm the best person to support you, though. But I don't want to, abandon you. I'm not trying to just sort of, kick you to the curb. I do want to support you, but I think you deserve more support than what I can give you. So maybe we can, you know, look into some resources together, or brainstorm a bit of who else you might be able to go to with this. So, I kind of and then sort of, I think it's worth it to follow through with that and actually do your best. But if it were to ever be a situation where it really felt beyond what you could do, I think, that honesty, maybe it does hurt their feelings, maybe it offends them, but at the end of the day, we have to take care of ourselves. So even if you just have to say, I'm sorry, I just can't be here for you in the situation right now, for whatever the reason is, I think that, that just has to happen sometimes. So I hope that's helpful. It's a difficult situation for sure.
It is a difficult situation. I find that answer very thorough and very helpful. And I think it goes back to referencing all of the things you pointed out regarding self care and how that needs to be of utmost importance. One of the other things that I find most valuable about Rose's presentations and Samaritans in general is I find myself, and I think people can relate to this, I may have an idea of what I want to say, but I have no idea the language that I need
Mm-hmm.
to put my feelings in a concise, clear um, phrase. And I think one thing Samaritans really shines at is being to provide the language that for the sentiments we're trying to convey, either for ourselves if we find ourselves in crisis, or for those that we are trying to help through a crisis. I think those
Mm-hmm.
words, finding the right words, I think is a great example of another area in which Samaritans really shines. Thanks for the question, and of course the
Mm-hmm.
thorough answer, Rose. Another
Yeah.
question coming in, and I'm guessing you get questions like this pretty regularly, which is, has the pandemic had an effect on suicide rates? Maybe you can speak a little bit about that, Rose.
Yeah, a lot of questions about that, and I think that it's too soon to know. And I know when the pandemic started, we on our helpline were getting definitely an increase in people reaching out. I mean, I know that a lot of helplines, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which we are a part of, really was receiving an increase in calls when we, you know, also had more calls, more texts, especially when it first began. And a lot of people mentioning the pandemic. And so I think, first off, one of the challenges is even just like the regular data. I mean, I know that the some of the stats that I shared are from 2018 because that was the last year that data was available for. So I don't think we're going to fully know the true impact for many, many years. I know that the World Health Organization has, shared concerns that the mental health effects could last years. And I know that there have been, I've found some studies kind of looking at what kinds of impacts there have been in previous national emergencies and pandemics and things like that. And, I know that when there was like the SARS outbreak, it seemed like there may have been an increase in suicide for individuals over the age of 65. There was also a study that was done about 25 years after Chernobyl, after the Chernobyl explosion in Ukraine, that first responders were experiencing elevated rates of depression and PTSD. And so I think that there's also sort of something that's been found that depression, anxiety, domestic violence, substance use, these things tend to surge after national emergencies. So, I don't have an exact answer, but I think if we look at some of these past experiences, it's not so hard to assume that the challenges and the effects might really last a while.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you to our audience for participating so much in today's webinar, and also, of course, the questions section. As I said in the beginning, if we didn't get to your question during today's presentation, we will certainly follow up with you by email, but don't hesitate to reach out to Samaritans prior to us responding at that hotline on the screen right now, which is 1-877-870-HOPE, and that's 1-877-870-4673. So write that number down, take a screenshot of this, and also, again, you can find the PowerPoint presentations in the handout section. I really think Rose's PowerPoint presentation is a great resource to share with people as well. So keep that in mind. With that, I do want to thank Rose for taking time out of her day to share her expertise with the NeedyMeds audience. And of course, we are honored to have a partnership of with Samaritans, and we are thankful for the important work that they do. Of course, thank you to our audience members for joining us today on this difficult topic. And please don't hesitate to reach out to either NeedyMeds or Samaritans again at that contact information on your screen. We do hope to see your name pop up in some of our future webinars. Again, you can find upcoming webinars on the calendar of events on the bottom right hand of the NeedyMeds homepage. And you can also stay in touch by following us on social media. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you, Rose. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Carla.
And
Bye,
stay
everyone.
well.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.